Well, first of all, welcome everybody who's joining us virtually. My name is Shane Meeker. I'll introduce myself in a second, and so will my partner, Greg. This is Storytelling for Startups. This is a workshop that Greg and I do and have done a few different times, usually a half day or a full day. This is clearly going to be an incredibly compressed version. But if you or your team ever have any interest in that half or full day workshop, we're going to give our emails at the end. Feel free to reach out. But we're going to cram a lot of material in this time period, be moving through it pretty quickly, and then have a fun exercise at the end. So as I said, my name's Shane Meeker, and I am the P&G company historian and corporate storyteller. And I have an industrial design background, but got that title and spend now the majority of my time working on stories because I had a passion for Hollywood, started studying in Hollywood as kind of a hobby, getting into also mythology and anything with story kind of, relation to it. And one day realized everything I was learning could be applied in business and started teaching storytelling both inside and outside the company. I'm a keynote speaker and also have a book out called Story Mythos, which is basically a lot of my content on how to tell better business stories using the principles of what's in your favorite movies, books, and TV shows. So that's me. Greg?
Thanks a lot. And again, welcome everybody. My name is Greg Eisenhower, and I'm a communication consultant now and a writer and coach, and also a trainer, having a lot of fun with Shane and some other colleagues doing these types of workshops. I spent 25 years at P&G in corporate and executive communication, where I had the great honor to work with the last 6 P&G CEOs and a host of other leaders over time. And retired 3 years ago, hard to believe, and I'm having a great time in this space now. I believe that leadership is fundamentally about influence, and that influence comes primarily through communication, and communication is almost always the most effective form or storytelling is almost always the most effective form of communication. And this is especially true for startups. As you can see here in this slide, if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur, you have to be a good storyteller. And in particular, investors are looking for startups who have a great story. They want to see a story that they know people are going to want to be a part of, top talent and business partners and customers and consumers. So we want to spend time talking about what makes a great story and how you can create a great one as a startup. So Shane, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of stories in business. Now, there is a great book that I highly recommend you pick up. It's this one right here, actually, called Significant Objects. And in this book, they talk about an experiment that these two guys, Josh Glenn and Rob Walker, wanted to run. And basically, they wanted to show that stories can add a measurable value to an object, to a brand, to a product, to a service, to, a chemistry, to a technology, whatever. Stories are powerful. And in fact, you see there's this quote that they had: stories are such a powerful driver of emotional value that their effect on any given object's subjective value can actually be measured objectively. So here's how they proved it. They basically went to like garage sales and flea markets and stuff like that, and they would buy, little trinkets and objects and things like that, like, yo-yos or ashtrays and stuff. They then would pair a writer with each artifact. They had that writer create a fictional story about that item. And then their idea was to put these items on eBay and see if adding that story would increase its value. Now, they were very careful. They didn't want this to be about manipulation, though. Anybody could say that was, Bob Dylan's ashtray he used on tour or something. But that's a lie. That's not true. So they wanted to show that even fake stories could add value. So they literally started off each story by reminding people this is a fake story. Then they put this is a fake story in with the entries on eBay, and the winning bidder got the item and the fake fictional story, and results were tallied. There was $128 of items. It was 100 items they got for $128. So some of them were like 10 cents, and then I think the most expensive one was $2 or something. But in the end, with fake stories, they sold all those for $3,612 with fake stories, let alone the real stories that you all have about, the origin of your company and your startup and your idea, the consumers and the customers that you did research with to understand, the obstacles and problems that you could help solve. maybe some of the challenges that you went through in your company to develop that technology or that idea. I mean, those are powerful stories. So your individual and personal stories can literally add an incredible and measurable value to your business. That was a 2,700% increase that adding those stories created. And when you tell your stories, just always remember, it needs to be a good blend of heart and head. Use the heart to pull people in, to really feel the emotion, to understand the stakes, to understand the importance, to understand the passion and what drove, the idea or the company, and then use data, facts, research, insights to back it up. But in the end, I will tell you that, the human brain really focuses a lot on that heart part, because that's where memory really comes in. There's an old saying, people hear statistics, but they feel a story. And I think that really applies there. And when you think of your brain on story, there's a couple of these I want to draw attention to. The first is the cortex down the bottom left, which is, believe it or not, data and facts activate only 2 areas of the brain, but a well-told story, an additional 5. Our recommendation, go with the 7, not the 2. And when that story is done well, when you tell it well, there's things from dopamine to cortisol to oxytocin that your body releases because it wants stories. There's a great book out called Wired for Story, and it's all about that. Is the human being is wired to engage in narrative. We want stories. We want to be part of stories. We want to help tell, create, share, and protect stories. So just remember those.
The other thing too, as you think about stories, that I'm a big believer of is focusing on your audience always. And I like to talk about communicating from the outside in, not the inside out. There's a tendency to want to figure out what our story is or figure out what our message is. But you need to start by really thinking about your audience and understanding what they need to know, believe, and feel to build on what Shane was just talking about. So know is really about the knowledge and information that people need to form an opinion or a perception or take an action. And that's critical, but it's not sufficient to really break through. And so much communication tends to stop just at no. But the next piece is to focus on, what do people need to believe? What do they need to accept as true? And this is really all about context. People want to understand why. And great stories provide enough context for people to identify with the characters and to understand why this story matters. And then to echo Shane's specific point, you also need to focus on what people feel. What do they experience as a result of engaging with your communication? And this is true for informal communication and formal communication. It's true for live or written or video. Really be mindful about the experience that you're creating when you ask people to engage with your communication. So always start with that audience in mind and ask yourself, what do they need to know? What do they need to believe? And what do they need to feel?
Awesome.
Shane?
So Greg and I often talk about 3 different kinds of potential startup stories. There could be more, but there's 3 really core ones, we think. And every startup probably has all of them. And you may need to tell them all, but we want to give you some examples and principles to think about with each of them. The first is the origin story. And we've already heard some fantastic origin stories over the Signal event from different startups. But there's always one of these, right? And origin stories create and share that insight. They share that inspiration. They share that catalyst, that spark that basically was, I saw this or we saw this and we knew that we had to do this, right? And a lot of those stories is great around, the connections that were made with the startup team on, we saw this and we did this and it gave us the idea to do this. Netflix is a great one. Netflix loves to talk about their startup story, which was when Mark and Reed, were driving along and they were talking about different pitches for businesses. And basically they kind of got off topic of pitches. And Mark mentioned how the night before his daughter couldn't get to sleep. She woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't get back to sleep. And so they sat together and watched Aladdin until she fell asleep. Well, the whole talking about renting a movie and watching a movie at home got Reed thinking, videotapes, don't get me started on videotapes. I just got charged $40 by Blockbuster because I returned a movie late. And basically that was the beginning of it. That was when the both of them looked at each other and said, well, wait a second. What if there's a way to watch any movie you wanted, but there was no late fees and you had more control and you could watch it when you wanted? And that was it. So it's not always, an innovation around an origin story in a company is that idea of the idea that creativity is kind of like a cat. It'll come to you when it's good and ready in many ways. Creativity doesn't follow you around like a dog all day. So you always have to have your eyes open. You never know when that creative inspiration for an idea would strike. And I'm sure some of you watching and viewing and listening know exactly what I'm talking about, because you may have been thinking one business and then saw something completely different that sparked your idea. So always remember your origin story and find a way to share that. People love to hear those.
So the next type of story that we'll talk about is a customer story. So a customer story is one that is very, very much focused on the customer you're serving and on the need or the pain point that you're addressing. It's also an opportunity to let your character and your voice come through. So not just the elements of the story, but how to tell it. So most, if not everybody on this call is probably familiar with Dollar Shave Club and may have seen their video, but we're going to replay it here because it's just a great example of a story expressed in a humorous, tongue-in-cheek way that captured the brand character and also focused entirely on the customer need and the customer experience. So Shane, can we play that clip?
Sure can. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis.
And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, Papa! Stop paying for shave tank you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
So that's a great example of a video that captures the irreverence of the brand, tells a compelling story, and it ultimately led to the sale of the business. Unilever acquired it for about $1 billion, if I remember right. So it's a fantastic example of a story that worked. Shane, you want to talk about the vision story next?
Yeah, the last one that we often talk about is vision. And people, Tesla is a great example of that because, it's not by the sheer number of cars. People love Tesla because of what they're driving to do. They want to be part of that story. They want to be part of that vision of where they see the future. And they've got a great purpose statement to bring that to life when they literally, to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Notice it doesn't say cars in this. Their purpose is this high level thinking about however this happens, we want to be a part of it, and we want you to be part of it with us to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. And I probably don't have to remind anyone or tell you how successful that's been for them as we look at how they're, being considered to be included in the S&P 500 now. You've got VW thanking them for paving the way. You've got the man in charge of marketing the Ford F-150 calling them a credible competitor. They were the best-selling luxury car of 2018. And it's still not that many cars, but people love what they stand for. They love the story behind it. And Elon himself is part of that story. He's got this science fiction vision that people find really compelling. Now, when you're telling those stories, there are some building blocks that you always have to consider. And this is kind of going to a little bit of, call it film school 101, I suppose, but there's some things that just every story has to have. And normally we talk about 6, but for the sake of time today, we're only going to talk 3 in particular. But there are 3 really important ones. And I would encourage you to think about storytelling like cooking. You know, you would probably agree that you can give great ingredients to a terrible cook, and the chances are their dish still may not be very good. Okay. On the flip side, you can give bad ingredients to a master chef, and he or she can still come up with something brilliant. In fact, there's a whole TV show that was created to demonstrate that premise, which is called Chopped. Because the premise of Chopped is, in the end, it's the know-how, the experience, the creativity, the risk-taking, the passion are more important than the actual ingredients used. Now, great ingredients and great experience, know-how, and creativity. Now we're really talking, right? That's where the power and a great, great timeless story can come from. But even with some basic ingredients, someone who's got that creativity can really build something amazing. And there's three that we're going to talk about. And we can sum up pretty much any story ever told in a single sentence. Any story that you've ever watched or read really comes down to this simple idea. A hero must go through an obstacle to get to a treasure, right? Got to have a hero in your story. The hero is the source of empathy. They are the window into the story. This is always your consumer. This is always your customer. It's basically whoever the audience is, quite frankly. If you're a presenter, it's always your audience. But the hero, we have to understand what they're after. We have to understand what they're trying to do. We have to also have empathy for why they're trying to do it. There has to be an obstacle. An obstacle is the lifeblood of storytelling. What that basically means is in Hollywood, they will often, quote this idea of your stories can only be as interesting as the forces of antagonism allow it to be. Weak problem could equal a weak story. So the problem is really, really important. And, that's why you really want to focus on the problem. A good product, a good technology, a good solution has that problem always front and center. And then there's got to be a treasure, which is the motivation for the hero. What are they after? This could be something emotional, could be something physical, could be something mental, spiritual, financial, could be a lot of different things, but you have to know that. So a hero must go through an obstacle to get to a treasure, or another way of saying it would be, who's your hero? What are they after? And who or what is in their way? And those give you the foundation building blocks for your story. Now, just like ingredients, though, just because you have them does not mean the story's good. So it's what you do with them that really makes the difference. Now, which one of these is your brand? Which one of these is your product? Which one of these is your technology? It's not the hero. Remember, the hero is your customer. The hero is your consumer. So the one that you are is the mentor. And these are characters and archetypes that always show up in stories, usually right before the trouble or right after the trouble has started. And the mentor has two key roles in storytelling: to guide and inspire the hero, and to give the hero some kind of items that will help them on their journey to deal with the obstacles. So what Greg and I are saying is unleash your inner Dumbledore. You are all Obi-Wan Kenobi and Glenda the Good Witch and the Fairy Godmother or whatever. And your job is to provide, inspiration, guidance, and help, while also providing lightsabers and ruby slippers. That is the job of a company, of a technology, of a product, of a brand. So the last section we're going to do, and then we want to do a quick exercise with some of you watching or that are in the room, is pitch writing. Now, pitch writing is really, really important in Hollywood because, up to 50,000 screenplays are sent to Hollywood each year. Only 200 to 300 of them make it to big screen. Let's be clear, only one of those wins Best Picture. And normally when you send, your screenplay to Hollywood, they'll also ask you to include what's called a pitch page. And that's basically the summary of your story. And they want to know that you can summarize it. So, in Shark Tank, for example, 30,000 pitches reviewed each season for Shark Tank. 150 make it to set. Only 88 make it to TV, and even fewer actually get the money. So, Barbara Corcoran's come on and said that within the first 2 minutes of meeting that entrepreneur, they've already made up their mind that, so you've got a really short period of time. So even if you're told you've got 20, great pitches are all about keeping and getting them to want more. And that is how Hollywood defines a pitch: an inspiring summation of your story that leaves the audience wanting more. And hopefully you all have heard the term elevator pitch. And, in my opinion, here's why it's called an elevator pitch. One, it's short, but two, because when the elevator door opens and they need to leave, the person you just gave it to, they put their hand over the door and they say something like, wow, you know, that was really interesting. Listen, I got to get off on this floor. Can you walk with me for 2 minutes? Because I'd love to hear more about that. Or listen, I got to go now, but do you have a card? Because I'd love to follow up. You know, if the door opens and they just turn around and say, well, hey, have a good day, then your pitch bombed, right? I mean, they didn't change any of their action because of what you said. So pitches are really easy to test. You want to practice those. And if any of you get Disney Plus, check out the Imagineering series and look at episode 5, because in it, the Imagineers talk about how they have to make pitches.
Okay. Oh, makeup. The hardest thing I think there is to do when you come up with an idea, Imagineering, is to be able to distill that story, that idea down into one sentence. We're going to talk about Midway Mania. You get to shrink to the size of a toy and play Midway games with the Toy Story characters. You can describe it in one line. If it's hard for you to present, to pitch, to understand yourself, then you don't have it.
That's the best way to put it, right? I mean, can you take your startup idea and boil it down to that one sentence that really makes clear what it is and why? And this is what some of those look like in Hollywood. You know, what if a man aged backwards, growing younger while the love of his life got older, which is the pitch for Benjamin Button? Or what if you could go to a zoo today and see real dinosaurs, which is the pitch for Jurassic Park? Or what if a child's toys came to life when he left the room, you know, which is Toy Story? But this also gets used for products a lot too. Like, what if you had 1,000 songs in your pocket, which is the iPod? And Steve Jobs even said that at the developers conference that year to introduce the iPod. And what if your phone could instantly set up and pay for a ride to anywhere, which was Uber's? Or one close to home at P&G, what if you could clean your dishes and the environment at the same time, which was for the Dawn Wildlife campaign? So these are really simple, but again, who's the hero? What are they after? Who and what or what is in their way? If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. Very similar to what the Imagineer said on that video clip. But this is what Einstein said.
Yeah, and I would underscore this point that Shane's just made, you know, from my experience and, you know, in corporate and business communication, is that getting to that Sesame Street simple clarity about what it is you're trying to communicate. And remember that you can only have one idea. There's a tendency in business communication in particular to try to layer on a lot of ideas. We used to call it putting ornaments on the tree. You need to reject that tendency, whether it's coming from you or from others, and focus on just one idea. And the challenge that I offer to you is to express that idea in 15 words or less. And we don't have time to unpack this in this brief session today, but in our more expanded workshop, you know, we go through a series of TED Talks, for example, and we identify those that we think have the clearest articulation of their idea. And it starts with a couple of great talks that are 14 and 15 word descriptors, and we get down to some that are 5 and 4 and even 3.
Yeah.
And the harder you can push yourself to get to 5 or 4 or 3, the clearer it is. And that's one of the things, you know, I use the phrase Sesame Street simple, that came from, that was the persistent push that I got from A.G. Lafley in all the years that I worked with him. And I think it's a great standard to hold yourself to.
Totally agree.
Shane?
And I would, there's another saying in Hollywood I've heard before, which is, if you can't get me excited in 50 words, don't bother making it 50,000. You know, so as Greg was basically saying, just adding more words does not mean it's a better story. In fact, the fewer words you can say, it's kind of like that Hemingway challenge many of you have maybe heard of, you know, 6 words or less. The more compelling you can make it in fewer words really shows you understand what's at the heart and at the core of it, the most inspiring insight behind it, and a really fantastic way to express it. So here's the exercise we have for you. We want you, given that counsel, to try to create a what-if pitch for your startup. Okay, and what you'll do is you'll add these to the chat, basically. So as you come up with them, you'll just type them in. Just type them in. Hey, it's a rough draft. You may already have it. If you don't have it, no big deal. Take a crack at it real quick. We're going to give you like 5 minutes to do it. And then we'll look through those and we'll read them aloud. And then, you know, we'll just get some reactions, see what people think. Just always remember, it's called a rough draft for a reason. It's not meant to be your last. Okay. Otherwise it'd be called final draft. So give yourself a break. Don't get too caught up in wordsmithing. When you generate pitches, my reco is to write as many as you can, as quickly as you can, because then you can kind of go back and then pick out the ones that you know are heading in a good direction and then start to tweak those, you know. It's kind of like a diverge, converge, diverge, converge. But for now, just try to get and capture that core idea of your startup in a good what if question. What if there was a technology that, what if I told you that we could fix the problem of, while also, I don't know, something like that. So why don't you take 5 minutes?
So one other bit of advice, Shane, is that if you're on the call today and you're not a founder and you don't have your own startup, think about a brand or a company that you admire.
Great idea.
And ask if you can write the pitch for that brand or company. So we want to make this a very inclusive exercise. So I think we've got a little bit of a soundtrack, Shane.
Yes. In fact, it was supposed to. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
So we'll give you 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Getting close to time. Start to finish up your ideas. If you're already thrown one out, throw in another one. Do it for a favorite movie, book, or TV show. Do it for another brand that you love, like Greg was saying. Do it. Do 2 or 3 different approaches for your company. It's about 1 more minute or so. Finish up any last ideas or thoughts. Okay. Think it's enough time, Greg?
Yeah. Well, why don't you jump in and comment on 1 or 2 of them?
Yeah, the question is.
You probably.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. So what have we got, Greg?
So, I mean, first of all, you guys are fantastic. I mean, these are great examples of really tight, concise pitches. What I love about every single one of them I'm seeing is that it immediately opens my mind to what comes next, right? It leaves me wanting to know more, as Shane said, is the gold standard. So I think that you guys are doing this very intuitively, which is fantastic. if we just call out some of these, I mean, everybody can,
Oh wow,
can see them.
there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah. So, what if everyone had access to fresh food? At a time right now of food insecurity, that's a very provocative and compelling kind of a question. What if you could listen to music with your friends regardless of the streaming platform you use? I can immediately feel the benefit of that. That's a great example of a customer story that we talked about. We've got multiple platforms in our own household here, and we're toggling between them. So I could see immediately that as a compelling benefit. I love Joy's comment about what if you didn't have to pay thousands per month to have a marketing.
I was just looking at that one. That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one.
It's a simple, compelling example. And I saw that she had something earlier around, what if you could have someone do this for you so you can do what you're brilliant at?
Yeah.
She's very strong hook there.
Lewis is also right below that. What if you didn't have to go grocery shopping on your own? Clearly, that has been an incredibly important one during not only COVID, but also before that, just helping people get their groceries sent to their house or even help shopping.
So we could go through all of these. I mean, every one of them has really strong characteristics. And my advice to you is to go back to the 3 types of storytelling that we outlined earlier. So think about that origin story, think about that customer story, think about that vision story. Every one of you should have a library of stories. You're not trying to create just one for your business. I encourage you to think about each of those and take these pitches and go through and craft an origin story version of it.
Yeah.
Craft one all about the customer, and then challenge yourself. I mean, in some of these cases, the vision is very clear. In other cases, it's maybe packed under the layer of a little bit more. So pull it forward and see if you can craft that kind of a story. Shane, do you have any other comments?
No, I totally agree. And have several of these ready. What is the pitch for your core idea, the pitch for your purpose, if you will, the controlling idea. Maybe you could have a very specific pitch on a particular technology that supports your purpose and larger idea. So that kind of gets at the same thing what Greg was saying, which is have a pitch for each of those different storylines. What's your pitch for the vision of your company, for the origin, for the customer story, for even something as specific as a technology. The more you practice these, the better you get. Although by looking on here, you've already practiced these because many of these are fantastic. But don't lose them. Don't lose them. A great pitch writing exercise with your team to do is I call it the tough producer meeting exercise, which is sit down with your group. Let's say you've got a new project and you want to create a pitch for it. And, it's always good to get a team working on that. So maybe you pull in, 5 or 6 people or whatever. You tell them what the problem is and you say, okay, everyone's got 5 minutes to write as many what if pitches as they can. Have everyone write one pitch on one Post-it. At the end, one of you collect all the Post-its and shuffle them all together so nobody knows who wrote what. And then one of you stands up and is going to read each pitch. And everyone in the audience now has to give a quick thumbs up. Yep, I put millions behind that. Or no, not sure what it means. Confusing, don't understand it. Heard it before, doesn't excite me. And no kind of, maybe. Nope, it's either yes or no. And basically, you create 3 piles as the one reading. The pile of ones that everyone loved, the pile of the ones that most people didn't, and a pile of the ones that were kind of polarizing. Maybe half the group did and half the group didn't. Take the polarizing ones and the winning ones after that exercise, redistribute them to everybody. And now that person's job is to take those and either converge them or iterate off of those, maybe make 3 refinements. And you kind of keep doing that back and forth, diverge, converge. Within like 30 minutes, you can have some really, really tight pitches. So just an exercise to keep in mind.
So we have a little bit of time left before the end of the session. We'll conclude here in a moment. But Shane, why don't we open it up since we have some time?
Sure.
To open this up to questions. We'd love to hear what do you think of as the biggest challenge that you face when you try to think about how to craft or how to share a story. Or if you've got any other questions all around stories in business and stories for startup, we're happy to entertain them.
And if not, we'll conclude. And also, by the way, we're going to give our emails at the end. So if you think of any questions or you want to think about a question, you can also email us anytime.
So Shane, we're getting a question. Could you please revisit the elevator pitch definition that you discussed earlier? We had Greg Meyer just came in.
Sure. Yeah, no problem, Greg. So, and again, it's just when I hear the word elevator pitch, normally people just think it's short, right? Which is an important component. I mean, that's why it's called an elevator pitch, because, unless you're in a really tall building, you've maybe got 20 seconds tops, 15, but the way that an elevator pitch really works is not only is it short, but when the door opens, the person you just gave it to, when they need to get out, they put their hand over the door and turn and say, wow, that was really interesting. Listen, I got to get off here. Can you walk with me for 2 minutes? Because I'd like to ask you some more questions about that. Or listen, I got to get off here, but that was really interesting. Do you have a card? Because I'd love to follow up, but let's grab a coffee, If the door opens up and they walk out and just turn and say, well, hey, it was really nice meeting you, and then walk off, your pitch kind of bombed, because you can tell it didn't stick. It didn't incite them to think different or say something or react, right? So pitches are really easy to test when you get them. Just literally, it's one sentence. Email it to some friends, and see what they say. You're at a bar, with some colleagues or friends. Share with them and see, do eyebrows raise? Do you get a visual reaction like, oh, like a smile means a lot, right? Or an audible reaction, by the way, is huge. If they go, ooh, audible is huge. Audible is huge. If someone makes an audible reaction to your pitch, you're probably on the right track, okay? Because that means you really, hit them with it. But it's all practice.
So we're starting to get some questions, Shane. We've got one question about when pitching for a product or service, is it more important to appeal to a specific audience or to focus on your personal vision, like a TED Talk? So I'll take a jump at that, and then
Sure.
please come in. My personal conviction is that you always start with the audience.
Yeah.
And your vision can be an important part of how you meet the audience's need, but the vision itself should not be what drives the talk, because that's what makes it an inside out message versus an outside in. So it's important to understand the audience. It's important to clearly define the objective, what it is you're trying to accomplish with that audience, what perception or action you're trying to inspire. But then go back to that, to the questions that I posed earlier, and ask yourself, what does that audience need to know, believe, and feel? In many cases, if you've got a really strong vision statement, you may have a disproportionate opportunity to address what they need to believe and to create the feeling experience that you want. So vision is a means to that end, but it's not the end in itself. You have any builds on that?
I couldn't agree more with Greg. Yeah, absolutely. And believe it or not, as someone who's also been at a TEDx event, I will tell you that the group that basically you work with is, you're getting ready to prepare for that. They're very clear and make you share and show them exactly what is the key idea for the audience here. What do you want them to take away? So even if it is your idea, you still have to design it always with your audience in mind, because they know too that in a TED audience, for example, you've got a wide array of backgrounds, from nuclear physicists to accountants to lawyers to students, right? And everybody's got to be able to take something away from your presentation. So you always have to keep that in mind. That also goes back to that principle that Greg talked about earlier, which was keeping it simple, right? And that means knowing what that controlling idea is. And, just always ask yourself, if my audience takes away only one thing, what's that one thing I hope they walk away thinking about, realizing, or pontificating on?
Another question is, how do you develop the skill of storytelling? And I'll comment on this briefly, but I want to hand this over to Shane, because he's the master. The first thing I would say is to remember that we're all already storytellers. Yeah. We're wired as human beings to respond to stories and to share stories. And when you try to think about it as being overly formal, it's easy to ignore your instincts. So start with that. The second thing is pay attention to great stories. I mean, Shane talks about the TED experiences. I spend a lot of time, even now, just watching those talks and finding other talks and just listening to people who do it really well, and you just absorb that. And the third is there's no substitute for practice, right? Yeah. Just find opportunities to develop stories and share them. The more you do it, the better you'll get. Shane, any builds?
One of the things that in a lot of my content that I really stress is also keeping up with the industry of stage, page, and screen. Because, that's an industry that sets a tremendous amount of trends in the world of storytelling, right? And there's so many books, and we would be happy to recommend them. If you send Greg and I an email, we can send you back a book list of things to check out. There's some great classes on Masterclass. There's some great videos on YouTube that we can recommend. But one of the things, to even build on to another point that Greg said, which is we're all storytellers, is everyone has storytelling powers. But you'll notice at the end of movies, too, that there's always a big, long list of credits, right? Because you don't have to tell it all by yourself. Trust me, some people are good at visualizing stories. Some are good at writing them. Some are good at researching them. Some are good at editing them. Some are good at filming them. Everyone's got different storytelling powers. So realize what those powers that you have are. Use those, but then also surround yourself with friends and colleagues and peers who have other storytelling powers and do things together. Like I'm sure some of you are great at writing them, but when it comes to visualizing them, you would love some help. And I'm sure you know somebody who could help with that. So that's why there's a long list of credits at the end. Because trust me, not every director is good at special effects. And not every special effects person is good at the writing. And not every writer is good at casting. They leverage their powers. But research. And they're, like I said, we'll give you a fun list of books to start to check out to begin with.
So we have a question from Patrick Wells. How do you mix in a good, compelling story that's focused on the customer and your pitch that tells about your company or idea? And my instinct on that is that that's a great example of a customer story, again, out of those 3 types of stories that we talked about. So what you want to do, because your idea, your vision plays that role of mentor that Shane talked about. So what you want to do is you want to start with the customer. You really need to have an empathetic understanding of their life and a particular experience or need or pain that they're having that you can help address. Create that moment first, because that's the context for your story.
Yeah.
And then explain your vision and how you are able to help. I think that's the way to blend those two together.
Totally agree. Yeah. Honestly, they should be together anyway, because one shouldn't be able to operate without the other. So, and now maybe depending upon your audience, you decide what order to put those in, but at some point you better get across both that customer and insight and problem along with your company's idea and how it would fix that. Yeah, that's a great one. I really like Stuart's question as well. How important is social proof to elevator pitch, i.e. want to be like or copy people, organizations we admire? There is nothing wrong with that. In fact, there is a great book, Stuart, you should totally pick up called Steal Like an Artist by a guy named Austin Kleon. Okay. Because every creative knows nothing comes from nowhere. All work is inspired by other things that we've seen, done, experienced, or from others, right? There's an old saying in Hollywood, there's no new plots, there's just new perspectives, for example. So now there's good theft and bad theft too. So there's this, idea of homage and respect and credit and transform and remix. That's very different than plagiarizing, right? So, for example, a great example of taking a movie that someone really, really liked and using it to explain another is the pitch Jaws in Space. Jaws in Space is Alien, all right? Because they're basically the same general plot, but clearly one is in the ocean, one's in science fiction. Or Hamlet with animals, which is Lion King. So, you can absolutely use other stories, and you could say that with a product. It's the iPod of... or something like that. You could totally do that. And that's, those are popular products, brands, and services that help people quickly visualize it. Steal Like an Artist, but check it out. You'll love it. Also, there's a great video on YouTube called Everything is a Remix.
Yeah.
Totally worth the watch. Greg and I love this video. It's by a guy named Kirby Ferguson.
We have a question from Henry Fellerhoff, who says, how do you determine if a positive reaction is due to a good idea or story, or to the desire just to give you positive feedback and support? And that's a really tough question. Because it's one of the things that is so challenging about doing these virtual events, because you can't really read the body language in the room. That's one of the things that Shane and I try to do whenever we're workshopping things. You can read the room if you're paying attention, and you can respond to it. In the absence of that, there's no substitute for getting feedback before you share a story broadly, or before you give a talk, for example. And we all have, kind of our storytelling kitchen cabinet, people who are perceptive and insightful and will be brutally honest with us. And, I work things. I've got people that I reach out to. I share ideas. They call bullshit when it's not as good as I think it is. but they also give me really positive affirmation on the things that are working. And so there's no substitute for having that kind of advisory panel.
Yeah. It's this is why editors are there, right? You need your personal editors. Editors' jobs are to take that writing and say, that's one way of saying it. I think here's another way that probably gets your point across clear. And to Greg's point, you got to have some friends, colleagues, peers, partners, whatever that will, in a constructive way, to be fair, right, give you the feedback that you need to hear and say, I'm really confused by this slide. I don't understand at all what you just described and why this visual is up here, or something like, and there's nothing wrong with that constructive feedback. There really isn't. So, but you're right, that is tough. But in an elevator, you can usually, honestly, body language being really important, and eyes being really important, you can usually tell if it's something that's genuinely, created a spark in them. Yes, Robert McKee's book, Stuart, is absolutely a must read. Absolutely. And take McKee's class if you can. I've taken it like 5 times now. Absolutely take McKee's class if you can. He does it a couple times a year, usually in New York or LA. And it's usually 3 days long, and intense, but fantastic.
All right, well, we are at the 1:45 mark. So I want to thank everybody for taking time to spend with us. As you can tell, we're both really passionate about communication generally and storytelling specifically, and we're passionate about the whole startup space. We've both gotten immersed in that over the last couple of years, so we're just honored to have a chance to spend time with all of you. I'll leave on this last slide. The function of the first draft is to help figure out your story. The function of every draft after that is to figure out the most dramatic way to tell that story. And I reinforce that good writing is about rewriting. And when I have seen people not communicate as effectively as they could, it's because they rush the process. And if you really want to be a great storyteller, it goes back to that question about how do you develop storytelling skills. You really have to learn to be patient and to rewrite until you have it, and allow space for that, especially for things that are fundamentally important, like getting your startup story right.
Yep.
So we thank you all. Shane, if you can pop up the last slide.
Yep, I will.
We'll move past that video, but we've listed our contact information there. If you have questions, we're happy to follow up with any of you individually. And as Shane said at the outset, if your organization is interested in working with us on a half-day or full-day version of this, we'd love to have that chat as well. So thank you very much.